Hello, my name is Yue-Ling. I live in China, and I want to share something that happened to me a few years ago. I know many of you might not believe this, and honestly, I wouldn't blame you. Before this, I didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural either. But what I experienced that night changed everything. This is my story. It was a warm summer night, the kind where the streets buzzed with life and the air felt thick with heat. I had just finished work and was looking forward to a quiet evening when my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was tense, almost trembling. Yue-Ling, your grandmother is in the hospital. She's very sick. You need to come now. My heart sank. Without hesitation, I grabbed my bag, got into my car, and started driving toward the hospital. The roads were quiet, and the darkness seemed heavier than usual. As I drove, a strange feeling crept over me, a sense of being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, someone, but there was nothing there. It's just been a long day, I told myself. You're overthinking, but the unease stayed with me. When I arrived, the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital felt almost oppressive. I made my way to my grandmother's room, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had followed me there. She was lying in bed, her face pale and her breathing shallow. My parents were by her side, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. I sat beside her, holding her hand. "Grandma, I'm here. I'll stay with you," I said softly. I stayed for about an hour talking to her even though she couldn't respond. I promised her that I'd take the next few days off work to stay by her side. When it was time to leave, I kissed her forehead. "Goodbye, Grandma. I'll see you tomorrow," I whispered. As I stepped out into the hallway, everything changed. The air was freezing, unnaturally cold, like stepping into a freezer. My head throbbed with a sudden, sharp headache, and a faint, rotting smell lingered in the air. I must be tired, I thought. It's been a long day. I made my way to the elevator, the cold following me like a shadow. When the doors slid open, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. But before the doors could close, she entered. A woman. She was tall, wearing a black outfit that ended just below her knees. It was plain and old-fashioned, like something from decades ago, and it clung to her thin, angular frame. Her jet-black hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she wore a black mask that covered the lower half of her face. But her eyes, they were red, bright, glowing red. She didn't look at me at first. She stood facing the elevator doors, completely still. The smell grew stronger, suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, but I tried to act normal. Then the elevator jolted violently, and the lights flickered. "Excuse me," I stammered. "Is something wrong?" She turned her head slowly, unnaturally, her red eyes locking onto mine. My breath caught in my throat. She stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were savoring the fear in the air. The smell became unbearable, and the cold was so intense it felt like knives slicing through me. I wanted to press the emergency button, to do something, but I couldn't move. Her hand reached out, pale and skeletal, and just before her fingers touched my arm, I whispered, "Please, don't," but she did. The moment her fingers brushed my skin, everything went black. I woke up in a dark room. The air was thick and cold, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My arms and legs felt paralyzed, pinned down by an invisible force. Candles flickered around me, their dim flames casting eerie, shifting shadows. On the floor was a massive red star, glowing faintly, surrounded by twisting symbols. And then they came. 8 figures emerged from the darkness, their faces hidden beneath black hoods. They stood in a circle around me, their presence suffocating. One of them stepped forward, holding a black book. Its cover was cracked and blackened, and the symbols on it pulsed with a sinister red glow. The figure began to chant, their voice low and guttural, speaking a language I couldn't understand. The others joined in, their voices blending into a horrifying, unnatural symphony. The figure raised a bowl of dark liquid and poured it over my head. It was ice cold, burning against my skin like fire. The star on the floor glowed brighter, and the symbols around it twisted and writhed, forming impossible shapes. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. When I woke up, I was back in the elevator. The lights were steady, and the air was warm again. The woman was gone, but the faint smell of decay still lingered. I sat up, my body aching, and felt a burning sensation on my arm. When I looked down, I saw it. A faint red mark, a symbol burned into my skin. The elevator began to move, and by the time the doors opened, I stumbled out, gasping for air. I didn't know what else to do, so I went straight back to my parents in my grandmother's room. My father frowned as I entered. "What happened? Are you okay? You look pale." I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. Finally, I said, Something happened in the elevator." I told them everything: the woman, the red eyes, the cold, the dark room. My father's face darkened, and my mother grabbed my hand, her grip trembling. "Are you sure this wasn't a bad dream?" she asked softly. "It wasn't a dream," I said firmly. "It was real. I know what I saw." My father put a hand on my shoulder. "Let's go home. You need rest." When we got home, I couldn't calm down. I called my best friend and begged her to stay with me. She arrived quickly, and I told her everything. She didn't laugh or dismiss it. She just looked at me, her face pale, and said, "This sounds really bad. Yue-Ling, you need to be careful." And deep down, I knew she was right. This wasn't over. The next morning, I called my boss. My hands were trembling as I held the phone to my ear. "Hello." My boss answered, her voice warm but curious. "Yue-Ling, is everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment, trying to steady my voice. "My grandmother is very sick," I said softly. "I won't be able to come to work for a while." There was a pause. "Are you okay though?" she asked. "You don't sound like yourself." "I'll explain everything later," I replied quickly. "Right now, I just need to be with my family." She didn't press further. "Take as much time as you need," she said gently. "I'll give you a month. Just let me know if you need anything." "Thank you," I whispered, hanging up. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. The dread from the previous night still lingered. Later that morning, my father, my best friend, and I drove back to the hospital. My best friend had insisted on coming with me, refusing to leave my side. "You shouldn't go through this alone," she had said firmly. The drive to the hospital was quiet. My father focused on the road, while my best friend sat in the back seat, scrolling through her phone. I stared out the window, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The events in the elevator, the dark room, the hooded figures. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As we pulled into the hospital parking lot, my father finally spoke. "Yue-Ling, are you sure you're okay to go back in there?" I nodded. "I have to. Grandma needs me." Inside the hospital, the atmosphere felt just as heavy as the night before. My mother was already there, sitting by my grandmother's side. My aunt and cousin had joined her, their faces filled with worry. "Good morning," my mother said as we entered. She looked tired, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "How are you feeling, Yue-Ling?" "I'm okay," I lied, forcing a smile. "I called my boss this morning. She gave me a month off to stay with the family." "That's good," my mother said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. As the day wore on, my headache returned, a dull, throbbing pain that grew sharper with each passing minute. I rubbed my temples, trying to will it away, but the sensation only worsened. "Are you okay?" my best friend asked, noticing my discomfort. "I think I need to go to the bathroom," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "Can you come with me?" She nodded immediately. Of course, my aunt stood as well. "I'll come too." We made our way down the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly above us. The closer we got to the bathroom, the colder the air became. By the time we reached the door, I was shivering. Inside, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm the pounding in my head. But when I looked up at the mirror, my heart stopped. She was there, the woman with the red eyes. She stood just behind me, her long black hair falling like a veil around her face, her black outfit blending into the shadows. Her eyes burned, locking onto mine through the reflection. I gasped and spun around, but the bathroom was empty. Yue-Ling, what's wrong? My best friend asked, stepping closer. Nothing, I lied, my voice shaking. Let's go back. When we returned to the room, I couldn't keep it in any longer. I need to tell you something, I said, my voice trembling as I sat down. My mother frowned. What is it, Yue-Ling? I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the faint red mark on my arm. It glowed faintly under the harsh hospital lights, its jagged edges seeming to pulse. What is that? My mother asked sharply. Is that a tattoo? No, I said quickly. It's not a tattoo. It appeared after that night in the elevator. What happened in the elevator? My aunt asked, her voice trembling. Taking a deep breath, I told them everything. The woman with the red eyes, the freezing cold, the dark room, and the hooded figures. My mother's face turned pale, and my aunt grabbed her chest, muttering a quiet prayer. My best friend sat silently for a moment before pulling out her phone. Let me look it up, she said, typing furiously into the search bar. There has to be an explanation. After a few minutes, she froze, her face going pale. What is it? I asked, my heart racing. She slowly turned the phone toward me. The image on the screen was identical to the mark on my arm. A star surrounded by jagged symbols. Beneath it was a caption, Satanic Sigil. Used in rituals of binding and control. It's satanic magic, she whispered. This symbol is used in black magic rituals. My mother gasped, grabbing my arm. Are you saying someone cursed her? My best friend hesitated, then nodded. I think so. This mark, it's not natural. Someone or something is connected to her now. The words echoed in my mind, chilling me to my core. Connected? To what? I don't know, she admitted. But this is serious. Yue-Ling, you might be involved in black magic. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical force. Deep down, I knew she was right, and I knew this wasn't over. After my family learned what was happening to me, the air in our home grew heavier with fear and uncertainty. My mother, my best friend, and my aunt tried to comfort me, but nothing could ease the terror that had rooted itself deep within me. That night, as I lay in bed, exhaustion pulled me into a restless sleep. But sleep didn't bring peace. Instead, it dragged me back to that horrifying place. In my dream, I was back in the dark room. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the flickering candles cast grotesque shadows on the walls. The massive red star glowed ominously on the floor, surrounded by the same writhing symbols that seemed to come alive when I stared at them. The 8 hooded figures were there, standing in a circle around me. Their presence was suffocating, their silence more terrifying than any sound. And then she appeared, the woman with the red eyes. She stood just beyond the circle, her long black hair framing her face, her glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. It was as if she was waiting for something. The silence was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. Then, without warning, she stepped forward, the hooded figures parting to let her through. She stood over me, her presence overwhelming. Her lips didn't move, but I heard her voice, clear and cold in my mind. You can't escape me, Yue-Ling. I'm with you now. I jolted awake, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, but the clock on my bedside table read 4 a.m. I tried to shake off the remnants of the nightmare, but the dread lingered. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. Yue-Ling. It came from the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to grow darker, deeper. My breath caught in my throat, and I clenched the blanket tightly. Yue-Ling. The voice called again, soft and melodic, but with an edge that sent shivers down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop. Eventually, the whispering faded, and I fell back into a fitful sleep. When I woke again, sunlight streamed through the window. My best friend had prepared breakfast and brought it to me. Eat, she said gently. You need your strength. I tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. My thoughts were consumed by the nightmares and the woman with the red eyes. My best friend noticed my distraction and leaned in. Yue-Ling, we have to do something, she said firmly. This, whatever this is, it's not going to stop on its own. I nodded silently, unsure of what else to do. My thoughts drifted to my grandmother, who was still in the hospital. I felt an ache of guilt for not being by her side, but I knew I couldn't face her like this. Not yet. There's someone I know, my best friend continued. She might be able to help. She knows about things like this, but we have to go to her. Who is she? I asked, my voice trembling. She's different, my best friend admitted. But if anyone can help you, it's her. We got into the car, and I drove as my best friend guided me. The roads grew narrower, the buildings fewer and farther between, until we were surrounded by trees and silence. The atmosphere was oppressive, the air thick with an unexplainable tension. Where are we going? I asked, gripping the steering wheel tightly. To a place where she can see you, my best friend said cryptically. As we drove deeper into the forest, a strange feeling crept over me, a sense of being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her, the woman with the red eyes, sitting in the back seat. But there was nothing there. Finally, we arrived at a small, weathered house tucked away among the trees. The windows were dark, and the air around it felt wrong. My stomach churned as we stepped out of the car. The door creaked open before we even knocked, and an older woman appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were sharp, almost too piercing, as if she could see right through me. "You've brought her," she said, her voice low and gravelly. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled of herbs and incense, and strange symbols adorned the walls. She motioned for me to sit in a chair in the center of the room. "You're marked," she said, her gaze fixed on my arm. "Show me." I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the faint red mark. Her eyes widened slightly, and she muttered something under her breath. "This is not just a mark," she said, her tone grave. "This is a tether. Whoever did this to you has tied themselves to your soul." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It means she is bound to you," the woman explained. "She will never leave you, not unless the connection is broken." She began to gather items from around the room. A bowl of water, a bundle of herbs, and a knife with a jagged edge. She lit a candle and began chanting in a language I didn't understand. The air grew heavier, and the room seemed to darken as she worked. The mark on my arm began to burn, the pain sharp and searing. "Stay still," she commanded. "This is not easy." I clenched my teeth, tears streaming down my face as the pain intensified. The candle flickered wildly, and shadows danced on the walls. Suddenly, the flame went out, and the woman stumbled back. "She's strong," she muttered. "Stronger than I expected." "Can you stop her?" my best friend asked, her voice desperate. The woman shook her head. "I can weaken the connection, but I cannot break it. This spirit, this entity, it's too powerful." The woman looked at me, her expression serious. "You may have to live with this," she said. "It may never leave you completely. You'll have to ignore it, learn to live with its presence." "Will it hurt me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Not directly," she said, "but it will haunt you. It will feed on your fear. The more you give in to it, the stronger it will become." Her words hit me like a blow. I didn't know how I could live with this shadow looming over me, but deep down, I knew she was right. As we left the house, the woman's final words echoed in my mind. "Be careful, Yue-Ling. It's not just a spirit, something darker, and it won't give up easily." As we drove back to the hospital, I tried to steady my breathing and calm the whirlwind of thoughts in my mind. My best friend sat quietly beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder for reassurance. When we arrived, my family was waiting in the hospital lobby. My mother's worried face softened when she saw me. My father, always stoic, gave me a firm nod, as if to say, "We're here for you." "I'm okay," I told them, though the words felt hollow. "Really, I'll be fine." They didn't press me further, and I was grateful. I knew they wanted to believe me, to trust that I'd find a way to move forward. So this is my story. I told you it was true. This is what happened to me, and this is what I have to live with now. She's still here, in the shadows, in the corners of my mind, in the nightmares that haunt me. But I will not give up. I will fight her no matter what it takes. Maybe one day I'll come back to tell you more. If something happens, if she gets stronger, or if I find a way to break free. Until then, remember this: ghosts are real. The darkness is real. Be strong, stay safe, and don't ever take what you can't understand lightly.